Welcome back to the AI-led Growth Summit, Day 3. Today, we dive deeper into AI's disruptive role in the future of SaaS, B2B marketing, partner-led, community-led, and many more emerging GTM strategies. Make sure you're following our conversation in the HSC Slack, and it's the events channel. And also check out all the sponsors in the right side of the screen. Let's kick things off. I think our community was the most excited about this event, so the whole conference was worth it. Welcome to the show, Doug Landis and Tomasz Tunguz. You need no introduction. How are you doing?
Rad. I'm great. Excited for this conversation.
Thrilled to be here.
Lot to unpack
Let's do it.
for sure. Awesome. Since Tomas, you're my guest here, I'll just lead with a little bit of background information that some people may not necessarily know about you. I didn't actually know until I started doing a little digging. Thank you, ChatGPT. Early 20s, you're in DC, you read Jack Kerouac's book, and that gives you the inspiration that you need to go to California. Is that a little bit part of it? Google was clearly kind of on your roadmap here because you, as an ML expert or ML engineer, that was the place where you wanted to land. But who gave you the Jack Kerouac book? That's what I want.
Yeah, great question. Yeah, I don't remember who gave it to me, but I remember reading on the road, and it blew my mind that Kerouac wrote it in a single sitting, and you can actually buy the book on a single scroll, which is just like a single piece of paper now. And I had
That's cool.
yeah, a friend of mine, I had a cousin who had an internship in San Francisco, and I came to visit him, and anyway, fell in love with California. I came out to Google, and there's this one moment where I was interviewing for an entry-level customer support job, and we went into this cafe. It was called No Name Cafe at the time, and there was this bowl of raspberries there, and the recruiter said I could have as many as I wanted, and I knew I wanted to work there.
That's amazing. You know what's funny? I was actually at Google at the same time. I remember
No
the No
way, is
Name
that true?
Cafe. Absolutely. 100%. The No Name Cafe was the best. They did
It
they
was
did the
incredible.
greatest thing, like with the food and the food in the gym and the whole all the experiences on campus. You never wanted to leave. I'd get there at like 6 in the morning, do my workouts, have breakfast, and work until the evening, and then play soccer. It was
That's it.
amazing.
It was an amazing time. Amazing
Yeah,
time to be there.
genius, genius. You know what's interesting, prepping for this conversation, one of the things that I've followed you for a long, long time as somebody who's also been in VC and in the startup world for a long time. You have been on the precipice in particular of like this AI wave, this AI revolution that we're in the middle of right now. And in fact, at one point in time, you even said that AI is poised to disrupt these entrenched workflows that these major companies, these big incumbents like Salesforce, Zendesk, ServiceNow, Workday, et cetera, are all built upon. And I guess I want to kind of start there is like, how do you think about how, you've got this massive influx of these new AI first startups, if you will, uh, competing against these massive incumbents who own the distribution channels and who seem to be bolting AI on top of their existing technology. Talk to me about how you think about the difference between maybe an AI first startup versus a big incumbent and how you think they could potentially disrupt these big players.
Great question. So I think the mobile app store, when Jobs launched the iPhone, we had a bunch of like apps that were basically websites in boxes, and we
Right.
called those mobile apps. And then you had this like Uber moment where for the first time you used location, and it completely changed everything because location was really built in. I think we are in that phase of mobile apps that are websites right now. And this is what all the bolt-ons are. And for some period of time, and it will depend on different industries, whether it's in accounting or legal or engineering, those will work. And then at some point it will all break. And I think the point it all breaks is when the workflows themselves change, right? You've had like 20 years, 25 years of AE and SDR motion that has been perfected
Yeah.
over time and honed and whittled. And now all of a sudden, an AE can manage many more leads. A lot of the work that a sales development rep will do is now fully automated. Like the research that you just talked about, understanding individual changes, listening to YouTube videos or podcasts or whatever it is. And so as those workflows change, eventually the systems that grew around those workflows no longer apply, and
Yeah.
people we'll start to feel a significant amount of friction.
Yeah, the change management I feel like involved in adopting AI technology in an existing organization feels a little daunting, to be honest. It's that's it. The thing that's really fascinating is this notion of agentic AI. And just for everybody who's here, you probably already know what that is. It's AI that can adapt and make decisions independently, very dynamically. I'm curious, how do you think it's going to dethrone SaaS? And do you think it's going to dethrone SaaS completely? Are we just moving into an AI dominated world, or will SaaS still have a place? I'm curious your thoughts on, kind of we'll call it the next 5 years, if you will, between agentic AI and SaaS.
Yeah, I think they're the same thing. I think they fuse. You won't be a software company without AI. Everyone will expect it. I think the point that you made, Doug, is the opportunity and the challenge and the puzzle, which is there's a lot of change management. The workflows themselves, like I mean, the workflows are changing so fast that it's hard for anyone to keep up.
It's crazy.
And yeah,
It's
so I'm
crazy.
designing a PowerPoint presentation. I've been trained, whatever. If I grew up in the McKinsey world, I was trained in a very particular way of making a presentation. And now
Not
I do
anymore.
not anymore. I go to Claude and I dictate a whole bunch of stuff and then say, create 20 slides and here's the format and here's
Totally.
the images that I want, right? And so what we see with a lot of these agentic companies is the customer success people are consultants. They're recruited from Bain and McKinsey because it's all about that change management and helping
Yeah.
people understand how you use these tools in a novel way.
Yeah. Yeah, look, to be honest, I think if you just think about historically over the last 100 years, every time there's been new technological advancement, like whether it was the telephone or the iPhone or whatever, the Palm Pilot, right? Every time there's been new technology introduced, there's the one thing that hasn't that they're the one constant, I guess, is change, right? Change management and helping to drive change across organizations, both internally and externally, is still the one hurdle that we all have to navigate. I think we can do it faster and easier now with technology. I'm curious, are there areas of a business or industry or sector where you think kind of agentic AI is not really a great fit?
I think, excuse me, the places where humans still need to build trust with each other, it doesn't work very well. So
Okay.
I think it will be a long time before there's a fully autonomous account executive, especially for considered purchases.
Yeah.
That's not to say that, I mean, I don't know, this is all heuristics, but like 2 decades ago, I would say most software buyers were maybe 15% of the way through the journey in buying a software before they reached an AE. And now I think they're probably like 70% of the way and they've
Yeah.
educated themselves. But there's still, when someone buys an ERP system, they're almost betting their career on that ERP. And it's very human to be able to want to call. It's like, Doug, I
Yeah.
need you, man. Like,
Yeah.
this is busted. My boss is on my case. And
Yeah.
so I think that those areas where there's a lot of human trust that's necessary, so at the AE level,
I agree
but
with that.
you agree with that, yeah. But
Yeah, I
otherwise,
totally
like,
agree with that.
yeah, go, please continue.
Well, no, I think, well, I mean, just think about it this way. Even if they're 70, 80% of the way through the buying process, I mean, like, look, you make buying decisions. We all make buying decisions on a pretty regular basis. Even though I'm further along in the process, there's still that 20, 30% left that I need to have a meaningful conversation with somebody. And it needs to feel different. With all of this information and intelligence at your fingertips, I fundamentally believe that intelligence is becoming ubiquitous. It's like it's there, it's available. The answers are everywhere. So now my expectation is actually different for you as a seller. My expectation is like you're going to come at me with a very, very thoughtful question or
Hmm.
conversation rather than just a list of kind of what I would call your typical, discovery questions. It's like, no, I don't want to have that conversation anymore. It just feels like that's shifted quite a bit, or as it's continuing to shift.
Yeah. Oh, awesome. Yeah,
Ooh,
this is thanks, Julia. This is a chart. So there was an engineer who published this. Yeah, he published the blue curve here or the blue-gray curve. And his gosh, I forget his name, but let me pull it up while we're talking about this. But the idea was he had this thought experiment, which is at which levels of seniority does AI impact the most and the least? And so
mm,
he started with this blue curve, and the idea is like, okay, whatever. If you're, and he did it for software engineering. So let's take the curve. if you're an entry-level software engineer, your ability as an entry-level software engineer to ship a lot of code is much faster. And you will make fewer mistakes and you'll get the benefit of the median, right? If we assume like a large language model is the average of all the code in the
Yep.
world, and you're starting as an entry-level software engineer, you're probably below average, but the LLM gets you, the AI gets you to a place where you're in the middle. And so that's a big benefit. Now, if you're in middle management, let's say, and you're very familiar with the system, you've been working in a company for 5 years, his contention was, well, you're probably equally fast both writing code with AI versus not with AI because you understand the code base. And so maybe there's like a modest benefit there. And then for the VP of Eng or the chief architects, there's a huge advantage again, which is you can go through different architectures. You can understand, you can go back and forth and test different things and experiment really quickly. And so that's that blue curve where you have positive for juniors and positive for the most senior and um, middle
Middle
impact. Yeah.
middle management is at risk, is what you're saying. It's
Yeah, so there's a broader point
true.
there. No, no, it's true. It is true. I think I was having this conversation with two different teams yesterday, which is if you imagine a company, very large company, you have the senior leadership and then you have the doers, and in between there's this huge communication organization that's basically multiplexing across everybody.
Yeah.
And so
Yeah.
what happens in a world where all the unstructured information of all of our conversations and our actions on at work are then assimilated, right? So maybe we'll have more doers. And I think this raises a broader point, which is, talking about like the go-to-market of software companies, we have all these ratios. Like here's a AE/SDR ratio, right? And we
Right.
15 years we've been like, okay, here's the science, here's the machine, and here's the ARR per CSM. All of a sudden that's completely changed. How many engineers per salesperson? And so that I think is something where the architecture of organizations will fundamentally change here in the
Yeah.
next.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think you've even said it that you think there's $1 billion software company that can be built with one person. I'm working on a company right now we're about to launch. I believe we can get to 100 million in revenue with 100 people. Just
Wow.
the way in which you can use technology to drive efficiency today. Like, and I want to talk about this. Part of what's happening right now is there's going to be a massive shift as we think about hiring in an
Mhm.
organization, right? Because AI is going to replace some human tasks. So we're not going to need as many SDRs. Maybe we don't need as many AMs because the technology is actually onboarding people so much better that we don't need as many AMs, right? Or CSMs as an example. Maybe if it's even augmenting new roles. So how should companies rethink hiring versus upskilling and kind of talent acquisition in this AI first world, especially on the go to market side?
Yeah, great question. So I was chatting with one of our founders. I was asking him this question, and he was basically saying you have to interview for prompting skills, which is
Wow.
totally different, right? It's
That is
like
so new.
it's so new. It's like, okay, here is a task. I mean, here is I mean, yeah, here is a task using the AI to solve it. And what you really want to see, particularly in the more junior roles, is you want to see an ability to create a huge amount of leverage from the AI.
Yeah.
Uh,
Yeah.
and
Ooh.
yeah, so
Dude,
different, right? And then
the
how do
reason
you
why I'm
hire
freaking
that?
out, I'm thinking about the SDR manager who's like, okay, I'm gonna go hire some SDRs right now. Let's see how they can use technology to actually, drive leverage. So instead of having 8, I only need 4. It's so
Exactly right.
interesting.
That's what so I think that's what you want to see, that sophistication. I mean,
Yeah.
it's kind of like 20 years ago when people were really good at Googling, right? But this
Yeah.
is the productivity is like 100x, right? Compared to that. And it's knowing how to use these machines, and Claude has its own idiosyncrasies, and ChatGPT, OpenAI, its system has its own idiosyncrasies. Like how can you chain them together or put different systems together?
So so I guess it raises a slightly different question, which is how does this then have impact on a company's culture? I feel like when you showed that graph, one of the things that immediately jumped out is if my expectations for the junior folks are so much greater. Well, I
Yeah,
mean, if I believe that their output is so much greater, then my expectation is likely a lot greater for the junior folks, likely even for the senior folks, because you have so much more leverage. So if you start missing numbers, if you start kind of missing plan, whether it's hiring, et cetera, maybe does that I mean maybe the impact feels greater because it's like, look, we gave you a lot of leverage, we gave you a lot of runway, and you're still not able to do that. How does all this change a company's culture?
I think, well, I hope it improves the culture. I think you get to a place where the expectations of high performance are much broader. I think
Mm,
so for a manager, your expectation of the team is you can do a whole lot more than you could, right? I mean, you were just
Sure.
talking about a million in ARR per employee, like best in class is like, I don't know, 300K in ARR. So basically a tripling in productivity,
Right.
maybe more. So you're expecting a whole lot more. I think as an individual contributor or doer, because you're doing so much more, you're kind of building an index of all the different workflows. And so if you're strong in one area, you might be weak in another. You should be able to actually, manage that pretty effectively. And the teams themselves will be smaller. I think, this might be a little bit idealistic, but all of us remember when we were working in a small team and we loved working in a small team because we could move really fast and things were simple. And
Yeah.
now I don't think it's crazy to say like you can achieve 100 million in ARR on a really small team. And so maybe we can extend that sort of that nostalgic period or the two pizza box period much, much longer. It'll be a lot more fun at work.
Two pizza box.
That's a
That's
Bezos
a,
thing, right? He has no
yeah,
meetings.
totally.
Yeah, yeah.
It's exactly. So let's talk about pricing a little bit here because this is a really important lever, I guess, in the world, especially in the world to go to market when it comes to pricing and packaging. It feels like, there's so many, and everyone has opinion about which was the right way. Is it outcome based? Is it usage? Is it hybrid? Is it, it feels like the one thing that I think we're forgetting about is the fact that like the AI inference costs are variable and they're unpredictable and they're usually built in, right? There's some element of variability in terms of the cost. And in many cases, if you're just a wrapper on top of a model, then you've got to add in that cost. What like how should companies be thinking about, especially all these go-to-market companies that are launching right now that are whether it's an AI SDR or AI RFP vehicle or demo automation, whatever, how should they be thinking about pricing with these AI driven features in a kind of a scalable way?
Yeah, well, you're in an optimal place. I think your margins increase with time. So all you have to do
Mm,
is raise enough actual capital to wait. I mean, you look at the DeepSeek moment, you've seen 1,000x reduction in inference cost in the last 2 years.
right.
I think you'll probably see another 1,000 next year just on the algorithmic side. Then the hardware itself is improving. Google just said that they've improved efficiency 5x on their hardware. So you're looking at like, I don't know, like a million X reduction in inference cost. And so let's say overall inference volumes increase by 1 trillion, the overall market will increase, but your margins will improve. You don't have to do anything. Um,
Yeah. Yeah.
so as long
Okay.
as you
So
raise enough capital to be able to sustain, I think you'll be in a good place.
okay, that leads me to my next question. As a VC, things are shifting, right? So
Very
arguably
fast.
companies may not necessarily need to raise as much capital. Or how about this? I've been talking to my co-founder. I'm like, okay, so we may not need to raise past Series B. If we can build this company, if we're capital efficient, if we're cash flow positive from the get-go, if we are hyper focused on efficiency while we're still scaling and growing, how should we think about raising capital beyond maybe seed or Series A? How does that
Yeah.
change your world?
So I don't think it changes it very much. And so when I started in venture, there was a slide on the end of every deck that showed how much cash the company would burn, and then they would add 20%, and that was the round size. In like 2012, that stopped being the case. It was the round sizes were no longer a function of burn,
Oh, crazy. Here's
right?
the
It was
cash
a
you're gonna burn. Here's 20%. Good
Yeah,
luck.
that's wait, that's what it was. And and starting in like 2012, that was no longer, it was supply and demand. It's like we
Yeah.
want to raise roughly this amount. What is the market willing to give us? And the bigger the auction you create, the more that you can raise and lower your cost of capital. And so for the most, for the fastest growing companies, I think it's been at least 10 years since there was any sort of bottoms up rationale for raising a certain amount of money. It's like we want to raise from a certain kind of investor, a certain size, balance sheet,
Right.
confer. And so it's the same dynamic. Other reasons you might raise capital, produce secondary liquidity for the employees or finance and acquisition or whatever it is. So I don't know if I think maybe put it a different way, the fraction of companies that could bootstrap if they desired are higher than they have been in the past because of some of the
Interesting.
efficiency gains.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. So maybe they can get a little further along before they go out and start to raise, which gives
Hmm.
them more leverage in terms of valuation. Look, valuation is kind of somewhat finger in the air, how much people are willing to pay. If you can get further along based on bootstrapping, then that kind of gives you a bit more leverage in your VC conversations. Super, super
Yeah, exactly
interesting.
right.
Going back to kind of the customer interactions in regard to AI, do you think AI is going to fully own a customer interaction? And if so, like if so, what markets are those best for versus where, where's the handoff in bigger markets? Or are we always going to have a hybrid model? Just curious.
Yeah, so I think okay, a couple different things. I think almost all of support is will be fully automated. The NPS coming out of AI support is much higher than humans because their patience, the patience of the robots is infinite, patience of a human is not. Uh,
Yeah.
and then I think you see SDR. It used to be you need, to justify an AE SDR model, you probably needed an ACV of 20K, maybe 15K if you were super efficient. I think you'll see SDR push. I think one of the major opportunities is to push to lower ACV products, prosumer products, even consumer products where you have somebody educating the buyer. And now all of a sudden,
Yep.
because the marginal cost is zero, you have an opportunity. And then, like we said before, I think getting to like 90% education of the buyer, a few questions about technical integration, and then really having a relationship, maybe a dinner, that part won't be automated. But a lot of these interactions will be.
Yeah. Yeah. That
I
makes,
think.
I mean, that makes so much sense, especially on the SDR side. Well, especially when you've got companies out there, like OneMind, for example, that's like basically can do all the selling, the low end selling for you. So it's like, okay, if they can handle like low end commercial transactions, that was always one of the biggest challenges, right? You're like, well, what about the smaller deals, the
Mhm.
sub 10K deals? Like, who handles that? Your SDRs may not be ready for it, but I tell you what, your SMB AEs don't really want to talk to a customer that's, 10K, right? As an example. So I think there's a great opportunity or market there for it, for technology to help.
Right. And the difference between unassisted and assisted conversion rates is 4x. And so at some point there's break even, right? There's an ROI on an investment. Mhm.
Wow, there's a stat, Julia. That needs to be shared broadly. What? That's crazy. Look, let's talk about data for a second here, because one of
Mhm.
the things that I know that a lot of companies really struggled with all the models coming out was the security of being, having these open models, whether it's using ChatGPT, Claude, et cetera, within their organization. And you've got these AI first companies that are largely built on top of these models. How is that impacting companies' decisions on being able to leverage new technology? How have you seen that? I've got a
Yeah,
couple
I think
examples where companies are like, nope, we can't. We can only use this part of it because this is touching, ChatGPT, and that's not allowed according to our policy.
Yeah, I think so 12 months ago, biggest blocker to AI adoption, I think, was security.
Yeah,
Today, it's not we see it less. I mean, there are obviously sensitive groups. There are large enterprises who want to run it on cloud prem, whatever, in their VPC. And then there's a federal government, certain people, intelligence community needs to run it air gapped. What we find is most people in the enterprise typically start with a model that's off the shelf, and they will either decide like I'll buy an API or I'll go to an inference as a service provider. And then over time, they whittle those large language models down to these constellations of small models because there's about 1,000x reduction in cost.
hmm
So it's the limiting factor is no longer security. It's all in the enterprise. It's now about ROI, making sure that the margins, the contribution margins, or the burn of the individual team is improving pretty significantly. At least that's what we hear in market.
that's so smart. It's Yeah, by the way, it's only been 12 months.
I
To your
know,
point, like it's
I
changing.
know.
Things are changing so fast. It's
It's
crazy.
it's hard to keep. I mean, I think I was chatting with a VP of engineering, and I was asking like, hey, what's your AI strategy? And he said it's really hard because the models themselves change really fast. And whenever the
Yeah,
models change, 20 to 40% of the prompts break. And so imagine like you release a product and 20% of the functionality breaks. And the hard part is like you definitely want to move to the next model.
right,
But you have this release cycle where the AI companies that are selling these models obviously want to move you to the next model and the next model because their pricing power is the strongest there. There's like a 400x
right.
difference in pricing. And so but there's this dynamic where an enterprise is just like I just want to freeze the model. And so I wonder if at some point some of these like open source models or some of these inference companies will have to say like this model will exist at this level of SLA for 24
Right.
months and we will not change it. The challenge is the data, like the web obviously is updating all the time
Right.
and so the underlying data changes, but this is a point of friction for a lot of enterprises.
Yeah. Well, there's a massive cost associated with that as well, right? So if I'm constantly like, if you tell me I need to lock down this model for the next 24 months, now I got to basically manage and maintain that.
Right.
Well, meanwhile, we're also continuing to invest to stay ahead of the competition that's in the market. It's just, it's kind of mind-boggling, but it feels like that's the new version of tech debt, right? Your
Yeah,
prompts changing.
great framing. Great. That's exactly right. That's exactly
It's
right.
it's so great. It's just a different form of tech debt.
Yeah.
Okay, one kind of last question here for you, and Julie, I don't know if we have other questions coming in, but if you had to bet on one major AI-driven go-to-market innovation that's going to dominate the next 5 years, what would that be?
Training. I think
Ooh.
the training of salespeople the training and the evaluation of salespeople will be fully automated.
The training, it's interesting. I'm glad you added that second piece because it's the evaluation of salespeople. Like, you come into a team, you take over a team, and the very first thing you do is you have to assess the butts and seats, right? Who do I have? And just trying to determine if they're any good or if they were just lucky in terms of how they hit their numbers or like what am I working with is actually really hard. It's trying to assess like their skills, their knowledge, their ability to actually go execute. I think that the evaluation piece is equally as important as the training piece.
Yeah, I think there was this paper that was published on creativity of AI versus humans, and humans created AI creativity is better than human creativity. I think if you had, yeah, if you,
That's
I think
so
what
brutal.
I know. Well, it's just because like think about like I think the analogy is like you're playing a chess computer. The chess computer's knowledge of all the
Yeah.
history of chess, or like the computer's knowledge of all the blog posts that are relevant or all the videos, just much larger than a human can store in their brain. And so if
Yeah.
they can pick from a bunch of different areas, then it's more creative. And so I think there's an analogy to be made here, which is a sales manager has a certain amount of experience with different kinds of products and different kinds of go-to-markets, but like an AI sales evaluator has universal knowledge across every kind of
Yeah.
technique and different kinds of sales calls across millions of different conversations or maybe more. And so you'll probably end up with a better coach. Yeah. Yeah.
What kind of training? Is it more like prompt training, like how to use and how to leverage technology to give you leverage in your role, or is it how to have advanced conversations given the fact that AI has given you so much intelligence and information? Like what kind of training, where is that sweet spot in the training space? I'm
Uh,
asking this question for all my friends who run their own training companies.
yeah, no, I mean, I don't know. Have you seen the latest Gemini ad? It's I want to say it's like a 60-year-old dad, and he's in his kitchen and he's practicing his job interviews with Gemini Live.
Yeah.
Right? And so I think about if I'm a salesperson, okay, I can pitch. I mean, if I come in, like I have one or two opportunities to pitch in front of my manager, and maybe he or she will listen to a handful of my calls before they set me. But imagine I could spend my whole first week. I mean, I could have 50 different pitches, right?
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
I could get
Onboarding. Woo.
yeah, extremely accurate and precise feedback. And I think
Yeah.
there's both a benefit to the individual in that their rate of improvement will have a completely different slope. And then there's a product marketing positioning benefit, which is you can really enforce a single message through the go-to-market org in a way that was just not possible before, right? You
Yeah.
can kind of like enforce compliance. And then we could debate whether or not that's good or bad, but
Right.
because maybe it leads to less experimentation, but like you can have a single voice in market in a way that you
Yeah,
probably
totally.
couldn't
That's
before.
that's that's assuming that the messaging coming from marketing is actually on point. But
Yeah.
we don't want to have that conversation about the challenges between sales and marketing alignment and integration. That's not what we're here to talk about. I think are we, Julia, do we have any other questions or are we at time here?
Or at time, hate to do this. We have a lot of questions about Google search and your take on advertising. I don't know, advertising within ChatGPT and all sorts of AI products. What are your thoughts, Tomas and Doug?
What's the question? Is it like how to use advertising ChatGPT to create
Yeah,
ads to run a Google
how
search?
how will AI
SEO?
disrupt? Yeah, how will AI disrupt SEO basically?
We've been spending a lot of time here. I think so on the SEO market, it's less clear. On the SEM market, search engine marketing, there was a data point coming out of Google's most recent earnings call where they said the monetization on AI searches is equivalent to classic searches, which blew my mind. I didn't think that would be the case. And so, I had sort of wondered whether Google would come out of the AI wave with just as much search traffic, but an inferior ads business because the cost of inference was higher, maybe the click-through rates were less. but it turns out that they aren't. They'll have just as strong of a business there. On the AI SEO front, 50% of traffic today on the internet is for robots, or it's robots scanning. It'll probably be 95% in 3 years. And so I don't know if you and I will surf web pages the way that we do today. We'll probably have an agent that goes and gathers information. So the internet itself will change pretty meaningfully. I think it'll shift to be much more text-based because
Mm.
robots can understand text better. You can kind of argue with the multimodal models, but it's just a lot less expensive to understand a text-based web page for a computer than it is for a human. And then the
So
last
then
thing
what
I'll
are humans
say,
gonna then what are humans gonna do on the internet besides use social media and post pictures of their dogs and political
yeah,
rants?
well, it'll just be a different. I mean, you'll listen. I think you'll listen to the news, right? Like you might listen to a radio broadcast about what's happening
Yeah.
inside of your company on the way to work. So I
Yeah,
think you'll
yeah.
spend as much time with a computer, but you won't spend as much time in front of a screen.
Yeah, that's which would buy although which would be great because then maybe you start paying attention to what the world around you a little bit more
Yeah,
versus
yeah.
versus being glued to your screens and you know how many people fall off of cliffs because they're not paying attention. Maybe we'll save some lives. Man, this has been such a fun conversation. Thank you, Julia, for setting this up. Tomas, you're rad.
No,
Appreciate
Doug,
you.
this is a pleasure. Thanks, Julia.
Thank you so much.